Hello and welcome. The title of today's talk is American Republic Explosion in Social Utility. And the thesis is that America's founders knew that they could have been a part of the British Empire on its rise to ascendancy. They still opted out because of who they foresaw being in the driver's seat of this empire and of their country by proxy. They would even risk death to secure a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and a citizen republic would secure their destinies and lead to an explosion in social utility and welfare. So here we'll be discussing why did the founders decide to break off. Maybe I should have started with this as a lecture, but why did the founders decide to break off from the British Empire? As Steve Bannon says, he says that the British Empire was on its rise around the time of the American Revolution. The British Empire was on its rise to ascendancy. Remember, the British Empire actually peaked in the year 1900. 1900, it peaked. I think at that time, a third of the Earth's population was European, and the British Empire famously covered a quarter of the Earth, of the surface of the Earth. But the American founding fathers could have been a part of this. They could have had their country invested in with the British Crown, the British Empire, the boon of the British Empire. But why did they risk their life? Not even just leave, but risk their lives in treason, in the crime of treason against the British Crown? Why did they do this to start a republic, the American Republic, right? Why did they do this? We'll get into here the key practical, pragmatic reasons and the reasons of real facticity of bodies, services. What I mean is that real life happens underneath of the Republic. Real life happens underneath of the American Republic, just as we discussed with the Roman Republic. American Republic is, as my colleague Tommy said to me, Chris Langan said, is the greatest explosion of social utility in the history of the world, was the founding of the American Republic. And we'll get into what this means for the real life quality of richness of life for Europeans and other peoples living in America, and why they benefit from the American experiment as such, and why it was the greatest explosion in social utility. We'll cover all this below. Excuse me. Point one, who is in the driver's seat? East India Company or we the people, right? Who's in the driver's seat? The American founding fathers, as Steve Bannon says, they knew what the future of the British Empire looked like. It looked like more of the same of what they were seeing then. The joint stock companies and these state-chartered companies like the East India Company, I forget the names of the other companies, but we all know the East India Company. It was this monopoly company chartered by the Crown to control all trade, all commerce out of the colonies, and especially in India. But they knew, the American founding fathers knew that these men, these captains of these industries, of these East India Company, would control and would lobby and control the government more than the government influenced them. So it wasn't even the monarchy controlling the East India Company, it was the East India Company controlling the monarchy, controlling the parliament, controlling the British government, British state. And the American founding fathers quite simply said, we'd rather have our own decision making, our own spot at the table. We'd like to be able to negotiate on America's behalf with other nations, with other peoples. We want the American experiment to take place underneath of its own sovereignty. Right, we want sovereignty for the American people. We want sovereignty for ourselves, because they were then to be citizens of America, and many of them would serve, as you know, as president of the United States in the early years of the American Republic. But who is in the driver's seat, the East India Company or we the people? What is the problem with monopoly? I think we all know the problem of authoritarian capitalism well today. We all understand it well today. The same ugly head, the same satanic control of money, the monies, the bankers, the banksters, the monopoly corporations, the big corporate monopoly corporations and banksters together control the direction and steer the ship of government of the British Crown. And Americans quite simply wanted something. They wanted something better. They wanted a prospect for their people. They wanted prospects not just for their own children, but for their own people, their own citizens, their own people. If you think that the American fathers were just a bunch of landed aristocracy that were selfish out to gain for themselves, you are sadly mistaken. The American founding fathers were men of virtue and character, as well as competency and capacity. So they wanted their people to not be controlled by a monopoly corporation, the East India Company and other companies as its ilk, What does this sound like today? It's kind of like BlackRock controlling the whole United States of America, or it's kind of like BlackRock. It's kind of like BlackRock, Vanguard, and Safe Street controlling all the investments, all the banking, all the central finance of the world. The American founding fathers abhorred this future. They did not want this future for the children, so that's why they instantiated the American Republic the way it was, as we'll get to below. Point two, they wanted to establish a republic where the enfranchisement extends to all male citizens who then invest in the nation as they themselves are vested with rights, obligations, votes, and in the decision making. So when we establish a republic, the strength of the Roman Republic was that it vested so many male property owners, citizens into the republic. It vested so many males, adult males, into the system, into the decision making, as well as owning property, having rights and privileges as a citizen. When you vest people with the rights and freedoms and property, and the fruits of they're able to pursue the fruits of their labor, able to own and discharge property, able to have obligations placed on them that they choose. This is the biggest outpouring for social utility. Freedom. In a word, freedom. Freedom, but also security. Freedom and security go together. You have freedom, but your property is secured. You have freedoms, but your livelihood, the fruits of your labor, are secured to yourself, just like what we found out with the colonists in the founding of America in Jamestown, how communism was, they started with communism, but then they ended up allowing people to cultivate private plots. Private property was one of the four key pillars of the American exceptionalism, remember. Having the rule of law. So private property with the rule of law, a common law, decision-making law in place to protect the property, to defend you against crime. So freedom goes together, but you have to have security of your life, your livelihood, and your person and your property, your house. Your home has to be your own. You have to have safe walls around you. And then with this, you have the enfranchisement. And so the republic with the American founding fathers, a republic where the enfranchisement extends to all. Enfranchisement means you have the right to vote. So enfranchisement extends to all male citizens who then invest in the nation as they themselves are vested with rights, obligations, and votes in the decision making. This is the playing out. This is what social utility is, combining freedom with security, with stability. Freedom, security, stability, all to go together so that they can be a prosperous land where people work and the fruits of their labor are enjoyed by them, their property is vested with them. Point three, careerism and opportunity. So if you look at some of the magnates and even the President Kennedy, if you look at their lives, Dale Carnegie was a poor Scottish pauper who migrated over. I think he was 8 years old when he came, maybe younger or older, when he came over to America. And he worked and he saved pennies and he invested in stock. And he rose up from a poor Scot. I think in Scotland they're kicking the tenants out of their farms in Scotland. So a lot of I'm actually descended from Scottish settlers myself in Canada. But Carnegie was a Scottish settler, and his parents were poor, and he slaved at the age of 11 years old, 12 years old. He worked in I think, a steel mill or on the rail line, and then he invested, and he rose up to be one of the titans of America, the titan of American steel, right? The billionaire, one of the wealthiest men in the world. Rockefeller similarly came from a poor background, but he worked I'm not saying whether you agree with these men or not, their morality. I'm just saying look at what their careerism and opportunity afforded them within the confines of the American experiment, within the confines of the American Republic. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford invented, created, produced, dominated, come to a point in their careers where they dominated. But the whole point is that this careerism and opportunity, being able to invent things, being able to enjoy the future life, being able to enjoy property, having the free market capitalism as it existed since Adam Smith's adventation in, I think, 1789 or 1790 of free market. I think he came up with the Wealth of Nations in 1776. But free market capitalism, as Schweikart said, came to America in 1790. Career with the Hamiltonian centralized and commerce of the American, centralized government and national bank and monies of the American currency. This came about at the same time that Adam Smith's Wealth of the Nations came out. So then in 1790, America had free market capitalism going forward its history. Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford, these titans as you know them, Carnegie, the steel magnate, Rockefeller, the oil magnate, and then later banker from his children, and then Ford in the automobile industry, being able to invent and control the production of motor vehicles for the first time in history at a mass scale. And the assembly line, as he got from Frederick Taylor. The Taylors and the Frederick Taylor assembly line that Ford adopted in his plants. And then you have someone like Kennedy, Kennedy was actually the first Catholic to be, I think, first and maybe only Catholic to be voted to be president of the United States of America. Prior to that, all had been Protestant, WASP, Protestant, Anglo-American Protestant, white Anglo-American, Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But Kennedy was a Catholic who served, and he rose up to become president because of the Democratic ratification, right? So the careers and opportunity, whether you be a public servant, a politician, a bureaucrat, and let's take them for now in their positive guises. The American experiment invites careerism and opportunity and free market capitalism so that men can rise up. Families are always rising and falling in America, right? I think Hawthorne said that. Point 4. So careerism and opportunity underneath of what we talked about, the established republic with property rights, security, freedom, and stability. And then point 4. The correct structures are in place, the infrastructure of the state and government, where people are given freedom and property and competition, as well as benefit from the fruits of their labor. And they have this stability, they have this freedom, they have this structure, right? So as Doug Wilson says, it's taken from the founding of America's republic until today, it's taken this long for the termites to erode the foundations of America's republic. So that's how strong America's constitutional republic was. It was invested for 300 years, almost 250 years, before the greedy capitalists, the greedy banksters could take over and extend their rule over top of it. But we still have structures in place that have remediation, have saving power, and the structures lasted for this long because it was so well conceived by James Madison, by Alexander Hamilton. The correct structures, you should move, as Mark Zuckerberg said, move fast with stable infrastructure. It's so important in your life to establish systems in your life and establish structures in your life so that you can move forward in your career and your life. Even more so for a government and state of a country, to have structures in place of state and government where the people are given freedom and property rights and have competition. They can live underneath the stable structures of the state. So with a republic, as we covered, it's a combination of executive, which is monarchy, like a monarchy, a senate, which is like the oligopoly, and a lower house of representatives, a house of representatives, which is like the democracy, the representational democracy. All these are structures, the separation of powers, the court system, the executive and legislature, the three branches of government, legislature, executive, and judicial, the separation of power. And the American Republic, because it had these stable structures for this hundreds of years. And Steve Bannon says that the American experiment wasn't really resolved until Abraham Lincoln won the Civil War, and the Continental Army on the continent of America was then firmly established and could not be dislodged by an American power. I think Abraham Lincoln or somebody back in the Civil War said, no power of Europe can come to America's shores and dislodge the Union from its lodging on the continent, basically. So that was basically the completion of the American Revolution, was the Civil War. If you want to perceive it that way, maybe we'll talk about it in the future. But the key point here is that the correct structures in place, the infrastructure of government, the separation of powers, the systems of government, and that the freedoms won in blood were not lost in ink, as like Larry and Schweikart said in their book, The Patriot's History. So with this, I leave you my piece of give. I hope it's good for you. Why is there an explosion in social utility? Well, it's because we don't have the banksters and we didn't, at the founding of America, have the banksters and the East India Company and the monopoly capitalism, authoritarian capitalism in the driver's seat. We had the people in the driver's seat. The Republic was an enfranchisement to all male citizens who then invested in the nation, are themselves vested with rights, obligations, and votes and decision making. Point 3 is there's careerism, and it's a land of opportunity. America is known as a land of opportunity. So Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford, and Kennedy, just these 4 names. There's many more names in American history, many hundreds of names in American history that have the same prospect. And you may not agree with these names, but they were successful in their own right and by their own heuristics. And then point 4, the correct structures in place, infrastructure of the state government, where people are given freedom and property and competition. Competition is so important. Free market capitalism, as in its modern form in The Wealth of Nations of Adam Smith. And then you're given to competition, where the private market decides who's valuable and who can produce, and then there's free competition, free competition, and this produces winners, but also produces wealth and brings wealth to the nations. as we know in America's history, wealth to the nation is so important. So with this, I leave you my piece I gave you. And this is nothing to even speak of philosophers or poets or artists or artists that have joined the American project, the American experiment, just to speak of businessmen and politicians, but really every type of American, every talent you have as an artist, as anything, as a philosopher, as anything, adds to the American experiment, the American Republic, and adds the base of wealth to the nations. Art is properly. It's funny that art actually is appraised as the most valuable asset to invest in high-end art, but that's an aside. But musicians, poets, philosophers, as we know, Chris Lang changing the world of sciences from his own base in the CTMU, and with this, the American Republic, an explosion in social utility. For all these reasons, there was an explosion in social utility, unlike mankind had ever seen before. The Industrial Revolution hit, and the economy of America grew and won both world wars in the 20th century, and became the dominant superpower in the world for the history to come. In Jesus' name, in the name of Jesus Christ, let the Logos inherit in your heart. God bless. Amen. Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you.